This is the Widow Podcast, and I am Karen Sutton, the Widow Coach. I'll be supporting you through the loss of your life partner so you can find a more positive way through your grief. I want to give you hope after loss and to know that when you are ready, you can create a meaningful life for yourself with the help of me, Karen Sutton, and the Widow Podcast. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Widow Podcast. This week I am really excited to have a lovely guest with me. We're going to have a great conversation. I have got Debbie Weiss. Have I said that right, Debbie?
Yes.
I did. I just checked.
Yes, Weiss.
Now I'm questioning my Debbie Weiss. I have got the lovely Debbie Weiss. Debbie is a widow herself. She is a former lawyer and an author, and she will be telling us all about her book that she has written throughout our conversation. Debbie, welcome. Hello. Thank you so much for coming. I know it's a ridiculous hour for you where you are now as we record this. So welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Karen. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. So let's start, I suppose, with George, your husband. Do you want to share a little bit about George, your relationship and sort of how he died?
Sure. I'd known George since I was 7. Our parents were scientists and his mom worked with my dad. We got sort of thrown together over the years. He was 4 years older. So that wasn't, always that great, but, we got together when I was 17 and needed a date to my high school prom. This was 1981, so a long time ago. And we went on that date and we'd known each other for years and we were together ever since. He was an engineer, software guy, and we lasted, for 32 years through my going to law school and becoming a lawyer and he being an engineer and switching firms and having a home. We didn't have kids. We weren't real social. We were both introverts. He liked to be with a computer. I like to be with a book. I'm a big reader. And we were fine until this was around 2009. At that point, I'd quit practicing work for a while. And he came home one day and said he was going to go to the doctor. And okay. He didn't usually do that. He was a workaholic though, and he waited until his software product, he wrote a product called Quicken, had shipped for the year. And said, I'm going to the doctor. And then he said, we're waiting. And I didn't understand any of this. But then he came home a week later and said, well, I've got metastasized male breast cancer, which is very rare in men. About, I think, 1 or 3% of breast cancer is men. And we had some good years, and then in 2012, he started to decline, and he passed from cancer in April of 2013.
And you cared for him at home, didn't you, Debbie, in sort of the final
I did.
weeks?
That was especially hard because George had denial. Through most of his illness, he was incredibly strong. He drove himself to chemo. He kept cooking. He kept working. He drove himself to radiation and then drove to work, which if anybody knows, I'm here in California with traffic is astonishing. But he went into a denial where he thought he was getting better even as he worsened. So his body was giving out and he was acting like, oh, everything's fine. So he wouldn't use the services the hospital ordered. He wouldn't get palliative care. He wouldn't let me do things like get a hospital bed, and worst of all, he wouldn't involve his parents, which was very sad, especially for them.
So sad, so sad. Do you think that was he didn't want to be a burden?
I think, a couple things were weird because he didn't have me involved in his treatment. He didn't want me involved. He tried to keep me out of it. I think one thing is that the cancer had spread to his brain, honestly. And I looked at his medical reports and it was everywhere. And the other thing I think is that he was just such a strong person. Something twisted. I don't know how that happens, but I think he had kind of a mental shift and he was trying so hard to protect me. And he had throughout this whole thing that just towards the end, it got misguided, or confused.
Yeah. So hard. Were you still working at the time?
No, I hadn't worked for about 10 years then.
Okay. Okay. So how did you support yourself through that time?
Not well. When he was really ill, since he was declining everything from the hospital and didn't want them involved, I was unaware of services and I didn't really have anyone to talk to about it. So I was trying to care for him as best I could. I finally got some in-home care, but not enough and very little and pretty late in the game. The hardest part, taking care of him physically because I had no experience. So I was trying to deal with a lot of physical things and hoping I wasn't making it worse. By the time he was in the hospital for the last time, it was just about the end. So that was difficult. I had hives, which was real fun. And I was on prednisone, which is like being really amped up. And so I did what I could. I was shopping and trying to, help make nutritious food and act like everything was normal when of course it was the opposite. And then trying to sort of get care, which was a mixed bag. And then, I wasn't in very good shape then.
That must have been so hard for you and very isolating, actually. And I'm assuming you and George didn't have the conversations about his end of life or what he wanted for you afterwards, or it was just almost complete denial on his part, or just wouldn't talk about it.
That's right. Yeah, he wouldn't talk about it. I tried. I would say, well, I need to know. He had controlled much of our life. And so I said things like, I need to know how to pay the bills. He chose to pay them from his computer. I need to know, how to use our home theater system. I mean, he was an engineer. Even the simplest things in our house were so complicated. He'd wired this home network and this home theater system. I mean, just watching a movie was extremely difficult, and how things worked in the house and sort of finances and all kinds of stuff. He had life insurance, which I knew. And we had, when he was diagnosed, paid off our house and gotten a trust for inheritance issues. And that was very helpful. And, the rest I figured out afterwards.
How did you feel about that at the time? Were you wanting to have more conversations with him, and he wasn't sort of able to have those with you? How did that make you feel? Was there anger? Was there resentment? What did that bring up in you?
I was very angry because there was two realities. I mean, there was, he wouldn't acknowledge that he was getting worse or dying. He was saying, I'm going to get better. And meanwhile, he's wasting away from, 175 pounds to what looked like about maybe 100, maybe 90. I mean, and, he was he looked like somebody who was in the ends of cancer. Your skin, everything.
Yeah.
You can imagine. He was incontinent. He was on oxygen tanks. He was in a wheelchair. He couldn't walk at that point. During that past 4 months, he declined from walking to a cane to a wheelchair. And each time I'd had to say, you're falling. You need to, I'm fine. No, you're not fine. So it was very difficult because it was like I was going crazy. He's telling me he's fine and I'm watching him die, and he won't let me talk to his doctors. And it was surreal. I can remember that time, but I can't really remember myself during that time because it was so insane. And looking back, I would have been much more proactive.
Yeah. And I think so when you go into that survival mode, it's like the very early days of your grief, isn't it? You are doing everything that you can to survive. And I think in that we lose ourselves a little bit, don't we? And we lose our way. And it's a really tricky time. You said you were both quite sort of solitary as a couple. You enjoyed each other's company. You were very happy with each other and chose to live in that way. After George died, how did you navigate that loneliness, the grief and everything that brings? Did you find you had to find a way of connecting with people, or did you find your way through it yourself?
Well, for the first few months, I was very busy getting things in order. I really fell back on being a lawyer to get the estate sorted out, to deal with benefits and things through his employment, even things you wouldn't believe, getting bank accounts in your own name, getting the darn car in my name. For some reason, the car was the hardest. That was it.
Wow.
You know, I could get the house. I could do a lot. Getting his car in my name was difficult. I really recommend everybody put your vehicles in both your names. But all that kind of stuff. And just the home, you know, there'd been so much deferred maintenance with his illness and my not wanting to be disturbed during that, you know, with workmen and all, there was enough. So I had some emergency stuff going on that I really had to fix there. And just kind of decancering it, making it feel more comfortable. I was doing a lot, and then I was sort of done. And I was alone, and it was suddenly the house felt large. It was a small home, but it felt large, and it was strangely quiet. And I also, you know, in the evenings, it's so weird to be by yourself when you're used to being married and having somebody with you all the time. And gosh, you know, I read about that, and it's true. Just going to bed, the bedroom was, I mean, oh my gosh, it was so cold and empty. I think you know, in the evening, you know, there's a television. So what I did, I lived in a suburban town that didn't have a ton of options. It's really geared for families with kids. I lived in Danville, California, which again is a very standard kind of suburban town in the San Francisco Bay Area. And so I just started to kind of look at what was there that I could do. I realized that I had to get out somehow, and I was walking and all. And, you know, ultimately I did things like I switched, from a sort of an empty kind of gym to a yoga studio that was very friendly and had a lot of people and had some bustle. And I had my late husband's sports car, which I'd planned to sell, but the guy who owned this car club was so nice. I started to go to this car club, and they had Saturday breakfasts. And so every Saturday I would get up really early and drive my car through the empty streets to go eat breakfast with people. And I joined our local Rotary. I don't know if you have that in England. It's a service club. It's pretty conservative, and it really wasn't what I would do normally, but the people were nice. Some of my neighbors had joined. You should do this. Okay. So I went to that, and Wednesday nights they had dinner, and it, you know, so I did that and learned about, you know, manning margarita booths for books or something. And, you know, so did that, but, and some other things. I ultimately joined some meetup groups. But what I did was I just started to kind of join some groups and see what I could do to make some kinds of connections and try to make some friends.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And then when was it that you thought about writing a book? I mean, had you journaled through your grief? Was writing something that had supported you? Where did this idea come from?
Well, actually, I always loved writing, and I'd certainly loved it when I was in college. But I went to law school so that I could do things like buy a house. Again, California, it's really expensive here.
Yeah.
Although I know London is as well. But so I'd sort of put away my creative aims and became a lawyer, which sort of killed any creativity I might have had. But when I retired, I joined a writing class, which met once a week at a local retirement center, an adult education center. And most of the folks there were retirees. So they were all about 20 years older than I was, maybe 25. They were really nice. And when George got sick, I dropped that. But when he died, some months after, I went back to those classes. And it was great because they were friendly. And this really nice man in one of those classes, who's a dear friend now, invited me to join a writing group of some of the more serious writers in the class. And my life got a lot better because once a week I had a class to go to with good-hearted, friendly people who seemed to care about me, even though I was all over the place and very angry and scattered and probably hungover. And then Fridays, I went to this lovely woman's apartment, and she had a nice chintz chair and a cute little dog and tea, and we all read. And I'm kind of an overachiever sort of person, so I had my writing available twice a week. I had something to do. And then from there, I started submitting to some magazines and things because I didn't feel that the things I was reading about widowhood really captured the depth of feeling that I'd had. I mean, that insanity, that surrealism, that feeling you're floating from insomnia, the sense that you're in an alternate universe, where your husband somehow isn't there. I mean, even the grocery store doesn't feel the same. It just doesn't. And I wasn't finding much writing like that. So I started submitting to some magazines.
Yeah. And really capturing the essence. It's hard, I think, isn't it? It's really hard to describe, put into words the enormity of widowhood and how losing a life partner impacts every corner of your universe. Exactly to your point. Nothing feels the same, does it? Nothing looks the same. You don't know who you are. You don't know where you fit. You don't know where you're heading. And all of these things are incredibly hard, I think, for somebody else who hasn't been through it to understand. How was that writing received, talking sort of about the truth around widowhood?
It was received, pretty well. I mean, I'm an unknown writer and it's very hard to get much traction. But at the time there was a blogging platform on the Huffington Post and you could get in and be a blogger. And at the time I had a lot of guilt. I didn't feel right. I felt like I had a dirty secret. And it was that I'd been angry with George and I had yelled at him when he was ill. I still feel bad about that. But I did get grief therapy, by the way. I should add that really helped. But
yeah,
I started to write about that. And, for example, I put something on the Huffington Post and I even said I yelled at my late husband. And it was like third or fourth thing I published. I don't know. Nothing I'd done before people seemed particularly interested in. But I wrote that and I felt so terrible. And I remember that night being awake and seeing all the likes and having even better, like 70 or 80 comments very quickly from not only widows, but just people grieving, other grievers who said, it's okay. You'll be okay. Don't feel bad. You did the best you could. They'd been in the same situation. They advised moving forward, and talked about, don't let this do this. And I felt like I had a community at that point. And from there I got into a group that wrote for the Hearst magazines, which was crazy. We were given 48 hours with all these writing prompts and we got paid the magnificent sum of $50 if our article was accepted, with, including editing and supplying photos. But, every prompt that I could answer, I wrote about widowhood because that's what I knew. And I was a new author. And, I had something like 8 articles published in the magazines and they weren't blockbusters, but again, they did well because this was, I think, something people weren't talking about, or they maybe not as much. This was around 2015, 2016. And so I wrote about what it was like to live on your own. For the first time at 50 to live alone and what it was like to date. And they had a prompt for sexuality as a widow, which I think the editor threw that out there just to see if I'd do it because I think I was the only widow writer in that group. But that's, but I did feel those articles were well received. And that was validating for me. And it also put me on the path to do other things and write my book.
Amazing. That's amazing. And I know writing is, it's so cathartic as well, isn't it? I think it can be really helpful for people in their journeys, whether they publish it or people just write down their thoughts. But these things are so incredibly healing. So obviously your book is called Available As Is, Midlife Widow's Search for Love. So how long was it after George died that you decided you were going to dip your toe into the dating world and be brave enough to see where that took you?
14 months.
And how was that?
Like a bad Fellini movie. It was gruesome. In many ways, it was really gruesome. One of the problems was I hadn't dated since 1981. And I assumed that people would be sort of sane. I might not like them all, but these guys were crazy. And you could really, unfortunately, see why a lot of them were single. These weren't usually widowed men. These were usually divorced men. people who'd been unpartnered for some period of time. And it was quite apparent why. But I didn't realize that that's what the dating world was like in your 50s. I didn't know that. So I'd expected this to be sort of like high school and, meet nice men. And, it's a little shocking when some guy's like, oh, yeah, come over and hot tub. Oh, when are you going to drive by this bar? I'm there every night. I mean, or, canceling last minute. I mean, there were people who were just very unpleasant. The thing that shocked me the most was how much this just felt like a power struggle.
Really?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
So as in who was in control of the relationship, I suppose, who had the upper hand?
Very much so.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Interesting. It's funny, isn't it? I think, so Simon died in the September and I went on my first date the following May, I think. So it was about 8 months, which is very quick. It's very quick. And I mean, I knew very early on that I didn't want to be on my own for the rest of my life after Simon died. I was 39 years old when he died, and I knew early on that I didn't want to be on my own. At 8 months, was I looking for love again? I don't really know what I was looking for. I think what I wanted was an escape from my reality. Mm-hmm. I wanted to feel like a woman again. Did you know? I just wanted to not be a solo parent. I wanted to not be a grieving widow. I wanted to just get away and have some fun and maybe feel some attraction. Just pure escapism. Was I aware of that at the time? No, I don't think so. And, do I berate myself for doing that quite early on in my journey? No, because I think you do what you have to do, don't you, to get through. And there's no right or wrong way of doing it. Did it mean I was no longer grieving? Did it mean I no longer love Simon? Of course not. It doesn't, does it? It doesn't take anything. It doesn't change anything. It doesn't fix anything. It can be an interesting experience. I think to your point, were you on dating sites, Debbie, yes, which is a whole other world. I mean, I did meet some nice people. on the dating sites. Like yourself, I also met some, how can we put this nicely? Without wanting to judge or cause offense, but some interesting characters, maybe.
That's kind.
Yes, trying to be kind. But God, that's just a whole, and I think, I did meet some nice people. I had some nice dates, and sometimes it felt like it was helping. Sometimes it felt like it was hindering, because the minute you aren't treated fairly or kindly, what you would describe as fair and kind, it really knocks you sideways. And I think it can really exacerbate the grief and bring it to the surface again, can't it?
Very much so. Yes, very much so. I think it's really interesting, Karen, that you talk about, why you started dating and to feel like a woman and to feel, and I felt that way in some ways too. I'd been a caregiver, and, I remember every day wearing these just awful old sweatpants, and I slept in George's old t-shirts, and at some point I wanted to feel put together, and I wanted to feel that I was capable of going out at a certain time and having a conversation. And I was 50 when I started dating, 49 when I lost George. I really respect women who prefer to be single in their lives, and I have friends like that, but I didn't. I wanted to be partnered again. So I saw my future had some sort of a partner in it. I probably should have pictured, a Persian cat instead, but, I had sort of this amorphous man pictured there, taking out the trash and being there when the furnace exploded or whatever. And I wanted to feel that I was competent to date and do this and see what that was like. And again, feel feel a little younger, feel less like this caregiver. And then it was bad, and I met people and it was bad and people weren't kind. And I was not all, some were, but but it was, people were critical and patronizing and icky. And it was shocking. And then there was this moment where it was like, is this as good as it gets? Is this the rest of my life? This parade of idiotic characters? Well, I'm looking for, this one person somewhere. So yeah, it started out as a good exercise, I thought, in recovery. And I did find a partner. I want to add this. I have hope. There is hope. I've been with somebody for 6 years now. So it worked out. But yeah, there were some times when it was like, oh my God, is this the rest of my life? Right?
Wow. It's a scary thought, isn't it? Because to your point, I remember after Simon died and wanting to meet knowing I wanted to meet somebody else, just really saying to myself, do not settle. Do not settle for second best. Don't put up with something just because you feel like that's the best you're going to get. Because there is that fear, isn't there? And after Simon died, I very much felt, my best days are probably behind me in terms of a relationship. If I'm lucky enough to find a half decent human being to spend my life with, I'm probably never going to feel as safe as I did with Simon. I'm probably never going to feel as loved as I did by Simon, because you haven't got that history. You haven't got creating a family and building a life and a home for yourselves that you don't have with this new person. And they're probably not going to love the kids as much as well, then I know definitely not going to love the kids as much as Simon did. And, but you think, but it could be all right. It could be nice. We could make it work. Mm-hmm. I have to say, I was very wrong in all of those things. And much like yourself, I have met a wonderful, wonderful man. He is amazing. We've been together for nearly 5 years now, and I feel safe. I feel loved. I feel secure. He adores the children. I very much feel like I have a family again. So like you say, there is hope and it is possible. You don't have to settle, and you're not going to meet somebody that's like your person. But there are good people out there, but equally, I personally had to kiss a lot of frogs along the way to get to Andy and find Andy. But that, it teaches you a lot about yourself, I think, doesn't it? Dating. It kind of helps you understand what it is that you want or you need, maybe. I think they're two different things, aren't they? Sort of what you want versus what you need can be quite different. I very much discovered that in my dating journey. What about you? Were you looking for something in particular but found something very different?
Well, it's funny. Originally, I thought I would just meet somebody and fall in love and we would create something together. I wasn't sure what, because by then I was fairly different than I'd been when I was with George. What helped me on my dating journey was actually not dating. In some ways, it was doing things on my own because things weren't working. So I took some trips by myself and I made more girlfriends by myself. I never had sort of a group of girlfriends. And then for some years I had that. They've all since moved on. But for me, what was useful was creating a life that paralleled dating. That was my life. And that worked for me on my own. And that ultimately led to my going back to school. I got a master's degree. It's called an MFA here. That was a 2-year degree, which was fun. So I got another graduate degree and writing, the best book I could and getting a professional editor and ultimately teaching writing, which has been really fun. So for me, that was probably the most valuable, and learning to speak up for myself and function. So I was never going to be the same person I was when I was with George. I'm always going to have control of finances and know where things are. And I don't understand electrical systems, but I'm going to try to have things that are simple enough that an idiot like me can use them. At least I'm going to have things that work for me. So that was probably the most useful for me, and learning to stand up for myself. I think that was what was valuable. And at that point, dating just seemed kind of an adjunct, and unfortunately not usually an enjoyable one, because once I'd sort of gotten over the novelty of it and being online and seeing this whole new universe that didn't exist when I was a kid, there wasn't really much to it.
No, it's a very, I think it's a very brave thing to do, actually, to go out and date after you have lost a life partner. It's complex and it's messy, and actually sort of building a relationship with somebody new when you're grieving somebody you love is not your average kind of start to a relationship, is it? And I think when, meeting new people, you can feel the discomfort. Did you have it on your sort of bio that you were a widow, or did you wait until you'd met the person and then sort of drop it into the conversation?
Well, my bio on most sites that had that option, I did say I was a widow. Yes. A couple sites that wasn't clear. Just like I noticed some sites, for example, didn't list children and ages, which seemed odd to me. I don't have any kids myself. So, some sites I found the bio info so sketchy. It's like, well, I don't know. Here's a guy with a dog. I don't know if I like him. I like the sites that are a little more detailed. Or, wow, guy with a fish. Okay. So he likes bass and, he fishes on the weekends. This is not helpful. But yeah, I did say I was a widow. And that was another thing. Most men I met weren't widowed. And, when we're widowed, we miss our partners and we loved our partners. And a lot of the guys I met, of course, were divorced. I mean, actually, my age at least, I did meet people who were coming out of relationships or had long relationships that had failed for a better word, but they were divorced people. And a lot of them were bitter and they were angry and they'd lost half their assets, California's community property. And so they were in situations where, most of them wanted to be rid of their partners, and they didn't understand the sense of losing somebody and missing them desperately and still having this, at least I had this sort of idealistic belief in love. That for them had been destroyed, which I think very much was the root of their problems.
And how did they react to the fact that you were widowed?
Ooh, that's a whole can of worms. That is such a can of worms. Here we go. What I found was a lot of them were very infantilizing and patronizing. Somehow it's like, oh, okay, you're widowed. Okay, so like a car has an engine. Well, you probably don't know how to do that. It's just very patronizing. Or, I was a homeowner. I was fine. Like, guys are going to try to take advantage of you for your money. And it's like, well, that's probably something I can control. I haven't sent a lot of money to Nigerian princes this week. It was this crazy stuff. Or you'll never meet anybody as good as George. And it's like, well, that just means you're not as good as George. So I really found that disturbing. And it actually makes me angry because it harkened back to when I was a lawyer in my 20s. And, back then we wore, straight skirts and high heels and all that. And I would just, so many men thought, oh, she's so dumb. She's young. I was a brunette then, so I didn't went blonde, but still and this was sort of the same thing. And it was like, oh, you've been so dependent your whole life. Your computer's not working. Is it plugged in? Maybe your husband plugged it in for you, and it was just appalling. I mean, when I wrote a lot about that in the power struggle, which I saw. And also, I said a lot, I'm a widow, but I'm not a moron. And that was probably my biggest complaint with men. And honestly, now that I'm not dealing with them in a capacity as a widow, but I am dealing with I'm always a lawyer. I still find that to be true of men.
Yes, I didn't necessarily have that experience. I think more for me, I also put widow in my bio, I think with some naive expectation that people would be kinder to me.
Yes.
if they knew I was widowed and grieving, I was like, well, if I just put that out there, nobody will be horrible to me and it'll all be fine. Because you hear these stories about being ghosted and people, you know, and it all happens. I don't really think it made a blind bit of difference. People still ghosted me and just disappeared off the face of the earth. But for me, I think, you know, after you'd been on a couple of dates and you know, starting to get to know each other a bit more, people had a real discomfort around the fact that Simon had died and I still loved him. And there was an element where they felt they had to fill his shoes. They had to be the person he was, that they didn't know how to talk about him in front of me. If I was maybe bearing in mind, you know, I did put myself out there about 8 months after. So I was still, you know, in the very early days of my loss. Yeah. And I dip in and out, you know, I'd date somebody for a bit and then I'd be like, no, I don't want to. And I'd be on my own and then I'd go back to it. And, you know, but I was still a mess, you know, I was heavily grieving and I didn't understand myself or my grief at that point. I didn't know how to navigate it. And I didn't know how to show up with somebody else in that either. And they certainly didn't know how to be. And, you know, a couple of people came back to the house and they saw the pictures of Simon and they were like, oh, it feels a bit weird. And I don't really, and I ended up sort of comforting them a little bit about it because they didn't understand the grief and what that looked like and how it was for me. And, you know, and you're like, oh, I haven't got the energy for this actually. Like I'm trying to figure all of this stuff out for myself and for the girls, my children. So I never particularly found anyone patronizing, but I definitely found, people, they do lie, you know, and people say things that you want to hear without necessarily even meaning it. But you know, I think you get a feel for it almost quite quickly, don't you? And I think what I learned was the quicker you meet someone, the better, because actually spending a lot of time texting somebody, people can pretend to be anything, can't they, over text and you know, you get into these, but I almost, you know, if I did feel there was a connection after a while, I'd be like, look, should we just meet for a coffee and go and meet the person? And then immediately you're like, yeah, okay, maybe, or absolutely not, no way. So that was kind of my learning of it. Whereas probably when I dipped my toe in, I absolutely wanted to talk to them as long as possible via text because it just felt safer that way. But it's a very interesting experience, I think, as a widow. I don't know what it would be like as a divorcee because I haven't lived that experience. But I think it teaches you a lot, doesn't it, about yourself and others?
It does. Yeah. It taught me a lot about myself and what I wanted and what I sort of, my baselines for people and sort of what I valued in people, and all that. That was extremely helpful. So it was valuable in that way. And I also looked at the options, you know, different kinds of relationships. When I wasn't meeting anybody I liked that much, I thought, well, could I just, you know, maybe have a few boyfriends over time and kind of dip my toes in and out? Is that a way I could live? And, you know, I couldn't. That really wasn't what I wanted. But so at some point I decided, well, probably the best option would be to be on my own, you know, if that doesn't work, or, you know, maybe go out once in a while. But I mean, I was kind of trying to see what I could live with. Could I live by myself? I'd never done that. I did that, you know, well, I didn't love it. Although now I'm living with somebody, and it's funny after, you know, some years of living alone to live with somebody in the house, because I'm so used to everything being exactly my way and eating exactly the salads that I want, you know. No, you know, oh God, you're bringing in carbs. You don't do the dishes, all of them, before you go to bed. That's a whole other issue. But, you know, I did learn a tremendous amount, which was valuable. But yeah, there was definitely some real low points where you're like, is this all there is? These are the people. I do agree with you though. Best to meet in person, because you don't know what you've got until you meet somebody, and you don't know if they're even going to show up. And when you're texting, you waste all this time, and then you meet somebody, and you text somebody for a while and they go, I met somebody else, and you're like, well, what was all this waste of time invested?
Yeah.
And the other thing I recommend also on the other end is, but before you meet in person, have a phone call. Because if they're really weird on the phone, or they can't even handle a good phone call, you're done. And also meet for coffee. I made mistakes where something, let's meet for dinner. It's like, yeah, great. And then, you're into an appetizer and you're like, oh my God, I've got hours left. So, definitely coffee, quick, daylight, done.
Yeah.
You like each other. You got plenty more time.
I couldn't agree more. Coffee in the day, in the morning, just like I've got an hour here.
Yes.
That's what the amount of dinners I went on, and you're sat across the table thinking, how long have I got to sit here and listen to this for? Like, how can I get out of this situation I find myself in?
Yes.
And it does it, and it can really drag, can't it? Some people love the sound of their own voice, and it can go on and on and on, and it's just coffee 100% all the way, short, sweet, quick, get it done, figure it out. And then, if you've both got time after you've had coffee and you really like each other, you might extend it into lunch, but just start with something that's relatively easy. I did go on a dog walk with a guy once who, it's funny, it's the profile pictures. And this is like, you cannot tell what somebody is like from their profile picture.
Right.
And, you meet somebody and you get chatting. And I remember I'm quite a big girl. I'm 5'10". I'm not exactly skinny. I'm a good solid build. And, I went along to meet this guy, and he was the smallest, skinniest little thing. And you're just like, that did not come across. I mean, I did like start to ask after that, but the picture that people put on, or the people can look so different. And I was just, you think, oh God, I've got to walk around the park now with you and create some conversation. It was so awkward, but it's it's funny as well. And I think it is a journey of self-discovery, and it's something I think that takes you away from your grief. It's not for everyone at all. I mean, we've made it sound like a pretty horrific experience. Did you have some pleasant experiences?
Oh, well, okay. Oh gosh. Okay.
No.
This is hard. One thing that's hard for me when I was very naive is I was very lonely. And so I would sometimes meet men that I thought I actually would like as friends, but I wasn't romantically interested in. That's another thing, is chemistry is iffy. You want to be attracted to somebody who checks certain boxes and maybe has certain levels of success and stability, but that doesn't mean you're attracted to them. And there were people I wanted to be friends with, maybe somebody who was a writer I thought would be interested. But this is a dating site. So one of the problems I had, and I was kind of naive, and I would kind of caution against, is these guys don't want to be friends. Even they're nice people, it's fine. But at some point, at least for me, even people where we'd said, hey, you know what? We're not crazy about each other. I can take it. That's great. I can do this. Let's be friends and share. We shared some, again, often writing, some other things. At some point, romance or sex will enter the picture. And this can even be after some idiot has told you, you're not his type. He's not that wild about you. And then suddenly it's like, well, then why are you coming on to me? We already did that. So that is a definite issue. And that did kind of taint some experiences I otherwise would have thought was pleasant. I definitely did have a great experience, though, when I met the guy who became my partner, Randall. We met in 2018. And that was a great experience.
Did you meet him online?
I did. I met him on the stupidly named website OkCupid. Or I call it Stupid Cupid. But yeah.
And did you know the minute you met him that he was the one?
No. No,
Slow
so that's
burner.
what's interesting. Sometimes it takes a little time. He was very nice looking. He's in real estate. So when we met, I was wearing jeans. You know, I don't dress up. By this point, I'd stopped dressing up for dates. I mean, that's another thing. I mean, forget putting on makeup just for coffee. At some point, it's your face. Someone's going to see it. Live with it. You know, I was showing up for dates after yoga. I mean, if I go to the grocery store that way, I would go on a date. Or coffee, you know. But so he was dressed up. He was wearing a blazer and these really fancy, like Gucci loafers. And I was like, yeah, this is too grown up for me. But we did connect over grief. He'd lost his mother, who he was close to, about 9 months prior. So he was still sad about that and very honest about grieving. And I'd just gone through a horrific breakup. And yeah, we don't have time for that. And, I was really sad and I just sad about the whole situation. So we decided to just be friends. And also he's a skier. He surfs. I don't do that. I do yoga and I'm a hiker, but I'm much more bookish. At that point I was going to be going back to school. And so, I would just thought, you know, we have enough in common for a couple of lunches, but he was cute and he was really nice and charming. So I liked him, but I didn't know.
No, it took time to.
It does.
Sometimes it's the best way, though, isn't it? Do you know? Though
Yes.
I have to say, I'm always very envious. You know, I speak to a lot of widows in my community, in my membership, in my program, and sometimes we talk about like how we met our person. And you know, some people say, you know, I knew from the minute we met each other, we fell in love right there and then. I knew that was the person I was going to spend the rest of my life with. And you know, you hear these real love stories, don't you? And I've always been very envious of those because I've never experienced that. But then I kind of think, well, is it just because you're just not that type of person that is going to experience something like that? You're somebody that needs to, you know, build that trust and that relationship with somebody. Because when I met Simon, we actually became friends before we became sort of partners, and we had a really solid friendship. And that was very much, I think, the foundation of our relationship. You know, we were really able to talk and communicate and share and understand each other on that level, which was so lovely. It was so lovely. And I really cherished that part of our relationship, really. And I think that's something I probably built up with Andy very differently. But again, just needing to have that foundation there, I suppose, and not letting yourself kind of go all in. But I think it is lovely when people have that experience in life of just seeing somebody and knowing right away. I think it's such a beautiful thing to experience.
Well, I would have two comments on that. You know, when I met Randall, that's my person, I was always happy to see him. And that was different because by then I'd found dating to be sort of a chore. And I would meet people and I was just sick of the whole thing. I'm a homebody. So I was tired of, evenings. And it's like, cause when you're dating, you do all this stuff, right? Because it's not like you're just going to sit around and watch TV or do what you normally do. At that point, I was sick of the whole mess. But when I saw Randall, I enjoyed his company very much. And we started out as friends as well. We were both sad and we both said, let's try being friends because we wanted, I think, to see if we liked each other as people. And both of us, I think, were tired of people who were just out for something quick. So that was valuable. In terms of falling in love at first sight, I do think that happens. I mean, there's so much information, someone said testimony about it. Sure. But I'll tell you something else. Some of us aren't like that. I don't know if it's obvious. I am definitely one of these I'm a prudent person. I'm a lawyer. I have anxiety. I can talk myself out of anything. I overanalyze stuff. So, I'm not generally one of these people who's going to be, I met somebody and now I know it's going to be. But I also think I'm going to be honest. People delude themselves that way. Sometimes I think it helps to step back and think, okay, this guy's amazing and it's great. Go out again. Have sex. It doesn't mean you're going to get married and this is going to, and put him on all your financial documents.
So true.
I think that the idea of that is wonderful. And I think even letting yourself believe that, but also keeping, your head on your shoulders and having a healthy degree of skepticism or at least self-preservation is very important.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. And I sort of love what you said there, actually, because I used to sort of meet people and I say to my friends, I don't know, he's nice, but I'm not sure. And like you say, overthinking it. And is this, going to be my next person? And one of my friends used to say to me, he might not be Mr. Right, but he's Mr. Right now. And that's okay. Just enjoy what you have in the now, have a bit of fun, have some sex. Did you, but you don't have to think that that's what it's going to be for the rest of your life. Just see where it takes you and see how it unfolds. I feel
that very much. One of my girlfriends, and she's more prudent and analytical than I am by a large measure, which is, I love her dearly. I never thought I'd meet somebody like that. I'd marry her, if that would, but, she was like, well, I'm going to meet this guy, and they dated before. And I don't know what to do. We're going to go out. He wants to get back together. And I was like, well, how do you feel about having coffee? Do you want coffee? Coffee. Yeah. Okay. So, okay. Well, that's all you have to do. And from there, would you like lunch? How are you going to feel about lunch? This can be a very slow progression, and the decisions you make can be incremental. This doesn't,
absolutely.
I was always a little astonished. Maybe I'm not much of a grown up, where I'd meet some guy and we hadn't even slept together or anything, or I don't know that I wanted to. And he'd be like, well, I'm going away. Let's go on this trip, or I'm going overnight here. And it's like, I don't want to be in a hotel room with you, so people would try to accelerate things in these really weird ways, but you don't have to do that. And I think as a widow, especially dipping your toe into new waters, and, you don't have to think, is this my person? And if so, oh my God, I don't think I like his credit report. You can go out a few times before you look at his credit history, which I would recommend, given a choice.
Yes. Yes. That's the lawyer in you, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
But it is interesting. I definitely had all these tick boxes, I think, when I sort of started dating, about, what I thought I wanted and who I wanted my next person to be and what they needed to have and what they needed to do. But actually, a lot of those things weren't that important to me in the end. Do you know? I think
yes,
I got a bit caught up in stuff that really didn't matter. And rather than thinking about the kind of person I wanted, I was more thinking about, what assets they had or what job they had and children and all that kind of stuff. And, and it was like, actually, in the end, none of that mattered. None of it mattered, and I had to let go of a lot of these sort of preconceived ideas that I'd created in my head.
I had that too. I did that too when I was dating. And that's the other thing I wrote about. I'm writing on Medium at that point, but it was like, I had this idea, I had a graduate to become a lawyer, and my dad's a nuclear physicist. He is extremely educated. My husband was really smart and very successful. And so I was looking for somebody who was really intellectually smart, successful. I wanted somebody with better graduate degrees than I had. And all that. And later I realized that wasn't important. It really wasn't. I can take care of myself. I'm financially okay. I got myself another degree. All that was fine. And what I really needed ultimately was somebody who was mature and caring and had the capacity for a real significant relationship. And that was unrelated to how successful or financially well off or whatever somebody was. And ultimately, I wanted someone who'd spend some time with me. I wanted someone to be together, and who was there. So some guy who, travels the world for his job looks great, but that wasn't going to work for me because I wanted to be spending time together.
Yeah, I know. It's an incredible journey. It really is an incredible journey. And I really think it helped me discover a lot about myself. It really did. And what was important to me in life, because I do believe that actually we learn so much about ourselves through our relationships with others, romantic or otherwise. And meeting all these different people, these different personalities, just so much information in it. You know, some of it was fun. Some of it was heartbreaking. Some of it was just crazy. But where it took me was to quite an incredible place, and I'm grateful really for all the things that I learnt whilst doing that, you know, whilst trying to find something meaningful again, or maybe in the beginning I wasn't trying to find something meaningful. I was just trying to survive and find some fun in a dark, miserable place. You know, that there's lots of different reasons. And I know some people will be listening to this thinking, I just don't think I'm ever going to want to do that. And that's okay too. That might change. It might not. It doesn't matter. But I do think it's incredibly telling, isn't it? It's incredibly telling when you take that plunge. So is the book then, Debbie, is it sort of I guess a diarized event of your dating life, or is it something a bit more sort of story-like?
It's very story-like. It's a memoir, but I really wanted it to read like fiction, and I wanted it to read easy, and I wanted it to be funny. It's funny because the whole dating thing was funny, and I cope by humor. So, you know, the first chapter, I'm putting together my dating profile, and what that's like as a widow and what that feels like in an empty bed doing that. In fact, here we are with my book available as is.
Love it.
And so I really wanted it to be good. And I hired an Oprah author as my editor. It was expensive. And again, I got an MFA. My book was my thesis. So I was reading it to cynical, I call them cynical millennials. You know, I wanted to see if somebody who wasn't a bougie middle-aged lady like me could like it. So I was, you know, I put a lot of time into it, and I had it edited by this, amazing, famous author, and through several passes. In fact, the first time I edited it, she said, "Great, you've missed the point." And I was like, "Oh, okay, this isn't good." So it's been through a lot, and I really wanted it to read like fiction. I mean, I really wanted it, and it does. It has dialogue. It has different kinds of writing stuff going on. I use lists because I think lists are funny, and it ultimately has a lot of humor, which is something I really wanted to infuse this with, because because the surrealism and the situations are funny, even though the cause of all this isn't.
And I truly believe and a great advocate for actually finding humor in your journey in some way. You know, I think it's, again, incredibly healing. And sometimes, you know, you do find yourself laughing at the situations you find yourself in and cracking jokes that other people aren't entirely sure how to respond to because they can feel a bit inappropriate. But just allowing yourself to see the humor in things, I think is really beneficial for us in our healing journey. And I think your book would be an incredible read for people. You know, just how you write and how you speak is amazing. And it's so heartfelt, but has a lightness to it as well, which I think is really important. Tell me though, Debbie, you've on the front cover of your book, you have a strawberry.
I do, you're right. I do. I have a red strawberry. Yes.
What made you choose that?
Well, my book is, it's an independent publisher. It is not self-published. I want to be very clear. It's She Writes Press, which is an award-winning hybrid publisher for women authors. So their process is very professional, and they use professional book designers. So I was given some options, and this was one of them. And I liked this one because I kind of felt like the odd person out when I was dating. I felt alone, and I felt very different, having come from this really long marriage, having been with my one and only partner since I was 17, not having been in the world since I was 17, since 1981. So, here's all the normal strawberries. And I felt like this odd strawberry out, but it's vibrant. See, it's got a lot of personality, but it's different. See, it's the odd strawberry out. So I related to that. But thank you for asking. You're the first person who's asked. Thank you.
I always think there's meaning. There's meaning behind these covers, isn't there?
Yes.
And what that is. And I'm just always intrigued. And I love that. I love that that's what resonated, because I think it's true. You feel very different in that world. A bit special almost, you know? And I think, the one thing I kind of would say to people is that when I sort of started dating, I very much went into it with the mindset of, well, who's going to want me? I'm broken. I'm grieving. I've got 2 children. I've got all this chaos around me. Like, who's going to want to take that on? But actually I had to reframe it and think, do you know what? If anyone is able to capture my attention, they're lucky. They're the lucky one, because I have a lot to offer. And I think it's very natural for a widow to go into dating feeling maybe slightly less worthy than somebody else because of the situation they find themselves in. But I would encourage anyone thinking of going out and dating to absolutely flip that, because the energy you're putting out there into the world, can lead you to settle. If you're feeling that you're not as worthy, but you are. And I think somebody else is incredibly lucky if they are able to capture the heart of somebody who is widowed, because I think that there's something really quite special about those that have lost a life partner, their ability to love and to care. And I think just experiencing the world through a slightly different lens, as you do after you've lost your person, is a gift to somebody else.
I agree completely. I mean, one thing about being widowed, when I started to date, is I started to feel more gratitude for my years with George, because I hadn't realized how different it was. Our marriage wasn't perfect, but we'd had 32 years of love. He really loved me, and I knew that. And I loved him. And we came to realize that he did know that, even though the end was difficult, and we'd had that. And I felt very grateful for that, because some people never had that in their marriages or their partnerships. They never had any, or they were fraught with acrimony. They weren't good. And they didn't have that love, and they didn't have that in their lives. And then conversely, what we're offering, if we want to choose to offer it, to be partnered again as widows, is we have the capacity to maintain real relationships. We've done it. We've gone through things like compromising and times that aren't perfect. And some of us children, not me, but people, many. And the things that come with having been in a mature adult, even astonishing, beautiful relationship, we can do that. And I do think that that's a tremendous gift that we bring, and that a lot of people don't see, and that is undervalued.
100%. And I think as well, when you do find love again, and you meet somebody incredibly special that's able to hold space for you and everything that you bring with you, and, including your person, there's a lot of gratitude in that. I'm so grateful for the love that I have now and the love that I had with Simon. And I think I don't ever really take that for granted anymore. It's such a gift to love and be loved and to feel safe and anchored in the world. And that's definitely something I took for granted when Simon was alive, because I didn't ever imagine it wouldn't be there, not at 39 years old, So I definitely took it for granted, and I don't now. I mean, I'm sure there are maybe moments, but not to the extent that I did before. I really do feel incredibly grateful to have this opportunity, and very blessed and very lucky. And I really feel that brings a different aspect to the relationship that I perhaps didn't have with Simon, sadly.
I agree. I didn't appreciate George enough. I didn't appreciate that how devoted he was to me and how loving and how giving and considerate and how he thought of me was such an anomaly. Because, I've had friends who are married and gosh, they complain about their husbands all the time, or marriages that weren't good or, divorced friends and people whose husbands were unfaithful, all kinds of things that I saw when I started to have women friends who were, divorced or sometimes widowed. But you see that. And I didn't appreciate it when I had George, but I appreciate it now with Randall, especially being older.
Yeah, absolutely.
And having a sense of mortality and a sense of, well, what do you want to do with this life?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's, it's a different dimension to a relationship, but a very positive one. Debbie, thank you so much for coming and sharing all of this with us. Where can we find your book if we want to go and read your stories of dating and maybe bring some humor into our lives?
My book is, well, you're in England, so it's a little different. In the US, it's easy to order from bookstores, and I think independent bookstores are so important. But my book's on Amazon, and it's on Amazon UK, so it's there.
Brilliant.
You can get it there, and if somebody asks, you can ask to have it in your library. For some reason, my book is in a couple libraries it's in a library in New Zealand. I don't know why, but thank you. And so, you can, the way things are these days, you can get it quite easily from a bookstore. You can order it or order it at your library. But the simplest thing is just on Amazon, and it's like Kindle Unlimited for 99 cents. I was trying to get a lot of readers, and also just hoping that it would be helpful to people, particularly widows.
Yeah, 100%. Of course. You are a brilliant writer, Debbie, a brilliant writer. So I highly recommend go and get the book.
Thank you.
Debbie's fantastic and it'll teach you something, but also give you a bit of a giggle, which is always welcomed, I think, in the darkness. So thank you so much, Debbie. Honestly, it's been so wonderful chatting to you, and we will hopefully see more of you. You're on social media as well, aren't you? Are you on Instagram, Facebook?
Yes, I am on Facebook, Debbie Weiss Author, also just Debbie Weiss. I'm on Instagram, Debbie Weiss Author. I'm on TikTok, but I don't go there. I don't understand it. And my website is Debbie Weiss Author. There is a Debbie R. Weiss. She's also American. She has brown hair and glasses. She's also widowed. So that's very confusing. That is not me.
Oh.
I look like I really don't look that different. I look very different. So if you see a Debbie R. Weiss brunette, very different, not me. Although she's lovely, and I think her book's probably really good. She's really nice. But yeah, so I am Debbie, and Debbie Weiss Author is my website. And I think I can get mail through it, and I answer everybody.
Brilliant. Amazing. Well, thanks again, Debbie. It's been so lovely talking to you.
Thank you. It's been lovely to talk to you, Karen. This was really enjoyable. I feel like I was talking to a friend. This was great.
Oh, bless you. Thank you, Debbie. Thank you so much for listening to the Widow podcast with me, Karen Sutton. If you would like to be part of a supportive community of people who understand your grief, come and join my free Facebook group, Widowed and Rising. And make sure you tune in to the next episode of the Widow podcast.